One of the first steps to playing a Dungeons & Dragons campaign is to choose your character. Now, some of these modules offer these pre-made characters and they're pretty typically great picks. However, most people will probably want to create their own characters. Part of creating your own character comes in the form of creating the backstory. While some people find this to be electrifying, it can easily become the worst part of your character if it's not done carefully, and it might lead to a less than satisfactory experience. What's up guys, I'm Jared from Carpe Diem, and today we are going to take a look at exactly what makes a great character backstory and how you can create a good character for your game. So you want to create an amazing D&D character, right? You've pulled interesting character traits from stories, from comics, animes, video games, and it's your first time playing and you really want an interesting and rich character experience. Now, you've probably seen complex and interesting stories like on Critical Role. So combine all of your favorite parts into one character and it's awesome and it'll be great, right? Well, let's break that down because we've all had that same mindset. In the same way that combining all of your favorite flavors into one soup wouldn't work, the same is true for when you're building a character. Here are 3 rules to live by while you're creating your character backstory. There's a very distinct difference between a complex story and a complicated one. Think of it like this. A complex character is a lot like an onion with many layers to peel back and you don't peel them all at once. While a complicated person is more like a tangled ball of yarn. You don't know where it's going and it's just kind of a mess. A complicated character in the same way just has way too much going on. For those of us who are old enough to remember the 2010s Facebook, when a relationship entered the "it's complicated" phase, you know that there were multiple things going on and none of them were good. If your character has more than one unrelated tragedy happen to them before your first session, you're probably complicated. If you have more than one goal to achieve, or maybe more than one unrelated reason to achieve a singular goal, it may be worth reworking. A good example of a complex character is Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. As he progresses through the story, he is slowly revealed. Now, you don't know that he's betrothed to an elder race, he has this undead army at his beck and call, or, he's the king of all men at the beginning when you first meet him. What you do know is that he's capable, that he's knowledgeable, he's focused, and he's basically the opposite of Pippin. He has a single motivation, which is to save the realm of men, and everything he does is dedicated to that goal. He's complex, but all the pieces point in the same direction. So, what about a complicated character? Are there any examples here? Yeah, okay. Alright guys, please don't hate me for this. It's one of my favorite characters in one of my favorite series of all time. I apologize in advance. In the Star Wars prequels, the story of Anakin Skywalker is insanely complicated to the point of just becoming absurd. Let's see if any of these mark as red flags if you were reading a character backstory. He's an orphaned chosen one with absurd magical powers. He has the wisest of all guiding characters in Obi-Wan. He's also best friends with the Chancellor of the Galaxy. He's married to an ex-queen. It's a forbidden love. He's the best pilot in the galaxy. He's also the best pod racer in the galaxy. The list goes on and on. Now, if I asked you what was Anakin's one source of motivation, what would you say? Was it to save his mom? Was it to save Padme? Was it to be on the council? Was it to be accepted by Obi-Wan? It could be any one of these. Now, Hayden Christensen did a wonderful job of making Anakin as relatable as possible, and I love him in the prequels despite some of these very valid criticisms. But here's what we can learn about that character in D&D. George Lucas wrote Anakin backwards. He knew where he was going at the end and he filled in the backstory later. He had to do some rather narrative gymnastics to make all of the crazy stuff fit, like Clone Wars, having twins, but not knowing about them, things like that. And sometimes he just straight up had plot holes. I don't seem to remember owning a droid. So, where does our backstory end and our real story begin? Okay, let's go back to 7th grade. You're in English class and your teacher hands you this thing. If you're anything like me and you just drew skateboard stick figures using it as a ramp, you may not have realized how useful this thing really is. This is a plot diagram and it's vital for understanding where in the journey a character is. You've got your exposition right here. You've got rising action. You've got your climax, your falling action, your conclusion. You know, this is pretty basic stuff, right? So here's where it starts to get useful. It's a great tool to visualize and identify what your character's motivations are. Now, Pixar is known as the golden standard of storytelling. It's no surprise that we sometimes use Pixar's films, especially the early ones, to discuss the layout of a good story. When it comes to a character you're building, it's no different. Every Pixar story starts off showing you what life is like every day before the big life-changing event, as if it didn't happen. This life would continue on indefinitely, and there would be no story of interest. Wall-E would have kept boxing up trash until he ran out of replacement parts. Woody would have been Andy's favorite toy until he grew up. This is the exposition. This is the setup. This is where your focus needs to be when it comes to your backstory. Wall-E portrays this innocent, curious, and kind of a bit of ingenuity because of all of those traits that he developed while he was on Earth. It guides a character through the rest of the story and explains why they act differently from the other characters. Woody is a great example of a flawed character with temptation and jealousy because he is Andy's favorite, and that's what drives a lot of the action through the rest of the films. And then there's something that always happens. There's something that gets in the way of the hero's objective. It all changed one day when Buzz landed on the bed this cool new toy. Eva landed and found a plant. Something happens that changes the narrative and challenges the character's beliefs, intentions, and motivations. This is the conflict. And now, you stop. That's it. You have your conflict. You have your motivation. And really, that's all that you need when you're writing for a D&D character. At this point, your character will either grow to rise up over each new obstacle, or they lose. Now, narratively, this is seen as character growth, but it can also be considered to be a more mathematical or literal experience when you take into the account of experience and leveling up. That's the idea of grow or go. Everything that happens from this point onward is why we play. It's the part that gets interesting. This is when the DM creates obstacles and other characters enter the party and events relating to your backstory, even vaguely. They create opportunities for your character to finally grow into what you've envisioned them to eventually be. However, if you find yourself writing events after your villain and your conflict have been established, you're not really creating a character, you're kind of more creating your own novel. If this appeals to you, then maybe write some actual fiction stories or make some submissions online. There's plenty of avenues for that. But to try to have this in a D&D game is really just to remove some narrative control from the group. Remember, when you play D&D, it is just group storytelling. You're bringing a single strand to weave into a cloth. This won't work if you bring your strand and it's already been woven in some fashion, or it's tangled and knotted. In D&D, at level 1, your life has not happened to you yet. You have not yet become Batman. You are not Thor. You are level 1, and you're pretty much just a talented townsperson at this point. You can have influences from pop culture, from books, movies, whatever, but remember, D&D is not a video game. You don't know how your story ends or what events will shape you along the way. Having it planned out only steals from the dynamic nature of tabletop gameplay. It's not the backstory that makes a character, it's the player. Liam O'Brien is one of the voice actors who plays in Critical Role. He has so many talents I won't even try to begin listing them out, but one of my favorite things about him is that he can play any character and make it extremely interesting. Think about it. His second campaign, he played a human wizard. Like, that's as vanilla as you can get. Caleb, who was orphaned and seeking revenge against some super secret academy where he learned magic. That's pretty much his plotline. The most interesting thing about the character he created isn't who he was or what he had done, it's what he will do. He filled in some of the details regarding the names and events, but he gave Matt Mercer, that's Critical Role's DM, he gave him enough ambiguity and narrative wiggle room to craft an interesting narrative that wove his backstory into the greater objectives. A big part of your character isn't even written down. It's the attributes, the actions, and the attitudes towards others that you have while playing that character. Take, for example, Caleb's feeling of being an outcast. Not because he's a lone wolf or he's too dark and too emo to be understood. It's subtly communicated through his accent, which marks him as a foreigner, his appearance, and questionably canon his smell, and his uncertainty when he speaks to others. His character's attributes and mannerisms. It's his attitudes and actions that are what make him interesting. Remember this, players of any skill level can always make a simple character fun. A simple background is never going to be a hindrance or limitation. Just remember, your character's personality is what makes them interesting. Don't give yourself the temptation of describing all the things that have happened to you. Your character shouldn't be revealed by spouting off a monologue about your past, but rather it should be your character's actions and attitudes that really bring them to life. It's a player's version of show, don't tell. By filling out and really writing down and focusing on just a few key details, you'll be able to differentiate yourself from other players pretty easily. You could use an accent. An accent is more than just some funny way of talking. Accents carry culture and history and social status. So think about it in your own life. When you're out in public and you hear somebody have an interesting accent, you have an immediate reaction and you treat that person differently, whether it's positively or negatively, which is completely natural. There's a curiosity that comes with speaking to somebody who doesn't sound like you. So pay attention to what stereotypes and what culture and what history you want to associate with your character. Well, what if you're not good at accents? That's okay. Elongating your vowels or clipping your consonants is not as important as it is the tone that you're speaking in. With a few small changes, maybe in your cadence, or in your pitch, or even the body posture, you can help your character become more memorable, more distinct. Never underestimate the power of changing your body language when speaking in character, even if you're playing online. And finally, how does your character handle relationships? Are there races or groups of affiliations that your character has opinions or prejudices of? Would your character greet one group of people gruffly and another group warmly? This gives a much deeper clue to your past than any monologue about goblins destroying your home village. All of the abilities, relationships, and everything we've talked about so far boils down to one thing: consistency. Keeping your voice and your mannerisms the same throughout the game is important for pulling off a character. Of course, unless some tendencies seem to change through character growth, but this just magnifies the importance of the influence of that trait that you had before you even changed. It could be something as simple as a tick, as a slower speech pattern, or leaning forward when you're talking in character. Now, the last thing that I want to do is discourage you from trying something radically different. A good player can eat up a wild backstory and make that character especially fun and memorable. But it's rare that the backstory makes the character. Remember, it's the player. A simple backstory can be just as compelling as a complex one. Focus on character traits, on motivations, on relationships, and you have the basics of an excellent character for your game. I'm honestly curious here. If you've been playing a while, what was a character backstory that really worked for you? Or do you have any horror stories that you can share of like some complicated characters? Leave them down in the comments. I would really love to hear from them. So that's it, guys. 3 ways to create a better character backstory. If you found today's video interesting, feel free to like and subscribe for more helpful content. This channel focuses on new and younger players and DMs and will cover a broad range of topics to help your D&D game get off the ground. I'm Jared from Carpe Diem. Thanks for watching, and remember, never stop writing.